All right, well, welcome everyone to Standing Our Holy Ground, a webinar series about gun violence and what the church can do about it. We thank you all for being with us today. Standing Our Holy Ground is a year-long webinar series focused on delving into the question, what can the faith community do to address gun violence? This is the fifth webinar in our series, and we have a wonderful group of speakers with us today as we discuss active and creative strategies that churches can take to address gun violence. The series is hosted by the Presbyterian Peacemaking Program in collaboration with the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship. My name is Simon Doon, Mission Specialist with the Presbyterian Peacemaking Program, and I'll be helping to lead our discussion. Joining us to help facilitate today's discussion is Marjorie Rossi, pastor and chair of the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship's Gun Violence Prevention Working Group. Before we introduce our panelists, I would like to invite Marjorie to give us an overview of the common understandings that ground our webinar series. Marjorie?
Thanks, Simon. These common understandings are intended to set a baseline of understanding to center our conversation and will help guide our discussion as we talk about the complicated issue of gun violence. So, our common understandings. Number one, gun violence is a public health epidemic that impacts our communities, our congregations, and our members, whether they know it or not. Number two, the impact of gun violence is disproportionate, affecting some individuals and communities often and others seldom. Number three, we must first understand the impact of gun violence by listening to victims, survivors, and those who experience it. Number four, the gun violence prevention movement is not anti-gun. Number five, the Second Amendment does not preclude reasonable, sensible gun violence prevention legislation. Number six, addressing gun violence will require changes in the legislation and culture of our nation. Number seven, the Presbyterian Church USA has issued clear policy and strong statements on preventing gun violence, but true change requires action and advocacy by our members and our congregations. Number eight, as people of faith, we must pay attention to the discrepancies between the teachings of our faith tradition and the messaging of media and special interest groups. Number nine, this webinar series is an opportunity for constructive conversation and learning, and not for the posturing and polarizing rhetoric that has characterized the gun violence debate. And number 10, panelists and participants in this webinar series will demonstrate mutual respect, listen for understanding, and engage in a way that bears witness to the best values and practices of their faith tradition. So now that we have common understandings and language to ground our conversation, we'd like to give a quick overview of how we are taking questions from the audience for this discussion. If you have a question, please use the Q&A tab in your Zoom window and indicate the panelist to whom your question is addressed. If you have questions for me about the Peace Fellowship's Gun Violence Prevention Working Group, please submit those questions on Q&A tab as well. Toward the end of the webinar, we will select questions from the Q&A tab to share with our panelists. We remind you to keep our common understandings in mind as you frame your questions.
Great, thank you so much, Marjorie. All right, well, I'd like to get us started with our panelist presentations. And so first up, we have Brian Miller, who is the Executive Director of Heeding God's Call to End Gun Violence, the faith-based and grassroots movement to prevent gun violence. Brian became involved in gun violence prevention after his brother was one of 3 law enforcement officers killed in a massacre at Washington, D.C. police headquarters. Brian has previously led Ceasefire New Jersey, a secular gun violence prevention organization, and co-founded Heeding God's Call in 2009, which uses various activities to get people of all faiths into activism and to prevent gun violence. Thank you so much for being with us today, Brian. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Simon, and Marjorie as well, and my co-panelists. I'm really happy to be here today. It's a little cold where I am, but that's life. And thank you for taking the photo down, because I used to have more hair there, and I feel guilty of myself. I'm the executive director, as you heard Simon say, of Heeding God's Call to End Gun Violence. We've been around for about 10 years, and we started at a gun shop in Philadelphia, the most notorious gun shop in Philadelphia, called Colosimo's Gun Center. This is a copy of an op-ed that was written in the Philadelphia Inquirer a few days after the U.S. Attorney for Eastern Pennsylvania shuttered Colosimo's Gun Center due to the public witnessing that we had done. And when I say we, I mean many different faith communities working together on this. That we brought 9 months worth of public attention to this particular gun shop, which was selling lots of guns that ended up in crime and so on. And we talked to the gun dealer beforehand to try to get him to change his practices, but he refused to do so. In any case, we eventually basically embarrassed ATF into closing the gun shop. It's from almost a decade ago, but we're still really proud of it, and people in the Philadelphia area still know about this incident very well. So I thank you for putting that up there, Simon. The next slide, which is, these are 2 pages of our general flyer, and it lists the sort of things that we do. Our main focus is definitely illegal guns, because we have learned that virtually 90% or more of shootings that you read about in the paper or see on TV or whatever are done with illegal guns, guns that are held by a shooter who is not the legal possessor of the gun. And we've learned how that illegal distribution system works, and we seek to find ways to block it, including actions at gun shops where we put public pressure on gun shops to become good citizens. But we do more than that now. This is what we call a memorial to the lost. This is one of our memorials to the lost. This one is a couple of years ago at Chester Eastside Presbyterian Church in Chester, Pennsylvania, a city that suffers horribly from gun violence. Each of these T-shirts has the name, age, and date of death of someone who was killed with a gun, in this case, in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. We actually have 8 of these memorials to the lost in all the counties of southeastern Pennsylvania and central Pennsylvania and in the DC area. And we'll be putting our first one up in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, in the springtime. We're very excited about. This memorial attracts tremendous attention from people in the neighborhood where it's put up, and it then develops media attention. Every time we get that kind of attention, it's a chance for us to educate the public, either through direct contact or through media attention, about how guns reach the street. Because frankly, most people, if they even think about it, they don't have any idea how it reaches the street. So we think that the only way to actually bring about change, is legislative change, is to educate the public so it knows what to demand. And these memorials to the lost are a great way to do that. This is another memorial to the lost. I'm sorry about the noise in the background. It was quiet before. This is at Overbrook Presbyterian Church, also in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Memorial, which we began with and we change every year, currently is 295 shirts and frames. It's huge, but we have the one you saw before was from Delaware County. That's about 150. We just did one in Bucks County in Pennsylvania, and it's actually 51. So they are all set for locales, and the names of the folks are from people in whatever locale it's set up in. Let's go on, and Roy will recognize this one. This is his church in Bethesda, Maryland. This particular memorial is for people in the DC and Maryland and Virginia suburbs. And then one more. This is St. Mary's Episcopal in Philadelphia. This is actually on the University of Pennsylvania campus. And you can see all the memorial all along. That's called Locust Walk. If you look at everybody, except for the one woman on the right, everybody as they're walking by the memorial is looking at the memorial. It attracts tremendous attention. And this is a flyer for an event that just happened this past Sunday. This is our step beyond the memorials. The memorials are portable. They're easily put in place, easily taken apart and taken down. So they're ideal to continue attracting attention all around the locale. And wherever they go, we always hear from people that call us or send us an email and say, we saw your t-shirt memorial at such and such a place. I'd like it for my church or my synagogue or my mosque. And which again gives us more opportunities to teach people about how guns reach the street. This particular event in Newtown in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, what we did was we reached out 2 months ahead of time to the local faith community and started talking to them about working together on putting this event together. And eventually we ended up with 14 different faith communities, Christian churches, a Catholic church, a Bru de Sangha, two synagogues, and a Muslim foundation, all working together to put this on and developing relationships among themselves by doing so. For this event, on a relatively cold day, we actually had 200 people come and participate in it. We had started with a service, indoor service at one church, actually with a friend's meeting. Then we walked through the streets of the town, holding signs up and the shirts themselves, getting attention to the people in the town. We went to a second, actually to an African-American National Baptist church, where we had an outdoor remembrance service where we had someone speak who had lost someone to gun violence. And then we went indoors, and indoors, everybody signed letters to particular legislators. So let's go to another. This is the page 1 on the right and page 4 on the left of a Gun Violence Awareness Day that we did in 2018 to give you an idea of the program. And if you take a look at it, when you have a chance, you'll see that we used lots of different people from different faith communities in the service itself. And then on the left, which is the back page of this program, because it folds over, in this particular case, we had actually 19 different faith communities who are still working together on gun violence and other issues. This is the inside of the program. And again, it talks about what was going on in that particular day. And this is a letter that one of the letters that we had people send to, in this case, state senators. We actually put together a packet of 5 letters for people to sign and put their contact information on. 5 because everybody has 2 senators in Pennsylvania, two U.S. senators, a U.S. rep, a state senator, and a state rep. And what we actually do, you can see there's no addressee on the top left because people come from different districts, not so much certainly for state senators. And it's just too difficult to figure out where everybody is there. So we actually get them to do the work, and then we take them back, and with interns and volunteers, we match them up to their legislators. We then collect the letters and hand deliver them to legislators, so they don't just go one at a time and one at a time. They actually get a pile of letters at once to the legislator. And as you can see, we refer to in the opening, my faith calls me to urge you to work or pass. This is an important part of it for us because we are totally faith-based. We want legislators to know that the faith community is not radical right Christian community. In fact, it's much larger than that. And many, many people of faith, in my view, the majority of people of faith, actually believe in gun violence prevention. And this is something that we want legislators to make the connection with the American faith community. And it's our goal because we believe that, unfortunately, the American faith community has not been as active in gun violence prevention as it has been for every other national social movement for change in American history. We want to be a little spark, if you will, to that faith community so that it grows in its involvement with gun violence prevention, because in our view, that's the thing that's really going to make for change on a national basis, and it's the thing that is missing. So we're eager to work with everybody all around the country on gun violence prevention. And our goal, again, is to get people of faith energized about gun violence prevention so that they move along what we call the spectrum of advocacy towards true activism. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope to talk to you, and I hope to hear from many of you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I really appreciate your perspective and your insight. I look forward to hearing from you in the Q&A. Our next panelist is Roy Howard from Bethesda, Maryland. Roy has been a pastor, social worker, counselor, and group facilitator since 1978. He is currently a trained coach with the International Coaching Federation, a certified facilitator for healthy congregations, and an Enneagram teacher, as well as a pastor. He has been a primary leader in gun violence prevention work with the congregation, presbytery, and local community for many years. His deep call is to be a generative person, facilitating the growth of leadership skills and spiritual depth in those who work with him. Roy, thanks so much for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Okay, I'm glad to be here. Hello to everybody. My job in the little bit of time that we have is to kind of talk about the nuts and bolts of what it is. How do you make change on this at the local congregational level that then leads out into larger communities? And I'm going to assume that the majority, if not 100% on this call, are in Presbyterian congregations. And if that's not the case, so for Presbyterians, the main leadership team is the session, but all of our bodies, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Methodists, and so on, have similar bodies like that. But in order for something as deep and as important as gun violence prevention to take hold in a local community, the leadership team has to be involved at the front end and to own it in a very significant personal way so that they can be leaders for the congregation. So the first step, if you're a pastor or an active member of your congregation, is to engage the session in every way possible to get them fully on board. In our case, after the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, I gathered our session together and we came up with a particular 6-point plan that would guide us into the future, and that we could share this plan with the congregation and get their conversation going with that, get their support, and move forward in a very specific way. So here's our 6-point plan. But the point I think that I want to make here just briefly is that you may have 6 other points. You may have 8 other points, 3 points, whatever it is, it's your plan with your session or governing body, the council, vestry. That's the leadership team that needs to put together a plan that will guide your actions. And that can be public. It can be public for the larger community, but it can also be public for the congregation. This just happens to be our 6 that included letter writing, as Brian talked about. We've requested personal meetings with all of our local, state, and federal officials. We've hosted forums. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Had many conversations and educational programs leading our own congregation in discernment and prayer and conversation together. Participated with a lot of neighboring congregations in addressing the whole topic that always comes up around this, around people suffering mental illness and how our communities can be engaged in that. And then lastly, to keep in view that this is really requires a kind of deeper moral and spiritual awakening to shift the culture in our country. And that's really long-term work. So I just want to put up a couple of slides here. The next two will be really simple. One is we did a community forum, and this slide just gives you a flavor of what we did. And we engaged a person who's very close to our congregation to do the graphics on this, invited the entire county, all of our congregations, and had over 200 people at this particular forum that included law enforcement as well as our senator, representative, a very distinguished body of people. Johns Hopkins Center for Public Policy was present. It was a very significant time in our community, wider community's life together. And then secondly, we showed the film Trigger. Many of you may be familiar with this film, and it's a really remarkable film and important for people to get a firsthand sense of the devastation that goes with gun violence and how it ripples out, not only in a particular family, but lots of families. So we showed that again to our congregation, but invited the wider community that filled our sanctuary. So that's all on the slides. These are just suggestions that I wanted to offer up to you all about what a congregation can actually do and the leadership process that's involved in doing it, because you as an active member of the church or an active pastor, elder, leader of the church can only do so much. But when you have your entire leadership team engaged with you and you've done the hard work of praying, of educating yourself, and then doing the pastoral work of engaging and organizing, the effects of this in the wider community are going to be so much greater than if it's one or two or even three people kind of working together. That's just a principle that the community being involved, the community of faith, is really crucial. The challenge, of course, is that our congregations, many of them are divided around this issue. Some divided simply because they don't want to bring something that's as difficult to talk about into their lives. So the pastoral work involved in this is real work. It's real engaging of people that may have different opinions that from each other. So I don't want to minimize how the work of prayer, discernment, conversation is necessary for this work. But in the long run, it really is the vocation of the pastor to help the congregation think theologically and practically about how we can address something that's killing all of these children. Our session is on board with this, and I'm happy to say that. The second thing, and probably the final thing that I want to say, and I look forward to your questions, is that we do have a gun violence prevention and advocacy group that made up of diverse members of our congregation, people who have said they're committed to this, and they're committed to it to engage the congregation in it, along with its ordained leadership, pastors, and others. This team of people is the kind of go-to group within our congregation. And again, I think that that's crucial to have a congregation-wide sense of mission about this and missional calling about it, because without that, it's very easy to get stuck and to find yourself in constant division. And division is real, but there are ways in which we can work toward a unified vision for the sake of God's children that has very little to do with partisan politics, and it has a great deal to do with protecting God's children, which is in fact the call of the church in every community where the church exists. So I think, Simon, I'm going to leave it there, and then we'll have some kind of practical conversation during the question and answer.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much, Roy. Really appreciate your comments and your insight. All right. Well, our last and final panelist is Cornelius Scott, the founder and executive director of the Family Survivor Network, a Baltimore nonprofit that offers clinical and spiritual support to individuals and families impacted by violence. Cornelius was impacted by violence when his son was a victim of a handgun assault, and violence also struck down one of his mentees. These experiences are what inspire him and drive his passion, advocacy, and support for families impacted by senseless violence. Cornelius, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the forum that you've gathered here, and I appreciate all the real advocates and engaged change makers, agents of change, who've spoken before me. And so I'll jump right in. Family Survivor Network is located in the zip code 21217. And this is the district, the Baltimore City district, that was represented in this represents the deceased Congressman Cummings' population of Baltimore City residents. It is one of the most economically and socially challenged zip codes in the United States. Within a 3-block radius of the location I'm sitting at right now, which is at 1032 North Fulton, to date, there have been 26 homicides year to date. On average, there are 28 homicides in a year just in this little 3-block area. We are here in a building, we occupy a building that we rent from a church, Mount Pisgah CME. And so that'll begin to frame where I go in the context of what I'll share, and in terms of suggestions for engagement as we go. So one, and I'd open up with a suggested reading for everyone. And that suggested reading is a book called Jesus and the Disinherited. The author of this book, Howard Thurman, is really the precursor or the godfather to Martin Luther King. And much of this book contextualizes the experience of the Jesus, not as deity, but as a person who grew up in Rome at a time where his people, his Jewish people, were really in a bind. You know, there were threatening tribes all around them. There was a lot of turmoil in terms of the theology of Judaism among competing interests. And there were this large, very powerful Roman Empire. And there were these folks who were trying to find a way with their back against the wall. And then in the context of the book, it sort of helps us to understand how this individual, this human, this person, became one that the Roman Empire would determine that time of the calendar would center around his birth and his death. That perspective of an individual who was communicating values of sort that would continue and facilitate the health of his tribe, and how that impacted what we inherit as a theological branding of sort, and which leads me to a step further in terms of my work, and I share that reading there as one to orient you first to a way to look at this paradigm of urban shooting, and to have a sensitivity so number one would be to listen, learn, and privilege the voices of the disinherited. Listen, learn, and privilege the voices of the disinherited. They're sharing something that is their experience. They're responding to something that is their experience, as Jesus did. Number two, much of in the teachings, much of what we'll read in this sermon is this idea that the Jewish people had their backs against the wall, and that he was really speaking in a tone to sort of reconcile a lot of trauma, and to suggest among the Jewish community that to revile because you have been reviled is a sin of the soul. And to bring understanding to that, and to understand that dynamic is useful in hopes that we might look at these folks with backs against the wall and have some context again for the number two of trauma-centered engagement. So the number one, listen, learn, and privilege the voices of the disinherited. Number two would be trauma-centered engagement. Understanding trauma, the back against the wall. Just envision it and as you move in whatever space you move. And number three, and I think this brings us to some things that are actionable, and where I'll move in terms of talking about an activist voice, was broaden focus, your focus on gun safety or the violence prevention to include some treatment of social emotional focus. Emotional focus. I work with survivors over quite a bit. Over the last 6 years, I've worked with over 250 women who've had a child murdered. And it's very interesting that the discussion at 21217, the daily discussion, as it would be, or more common discussion, is not necessarily access to handguns. It is not necessarily the types of weapons that were used to kill someone, but it is more sensitivity to the decider, the person who pulled the trigger. Because in this community, we got two problems, right? For every killing within 3 blocks, this 3 blocks area, we've got one woman's child left dead, and we have another woman's child or family's child that is probably headed to prison. And so there's this duality in this space that and the numbers of the sheer daily volume, the daily assault of this, in a single household, you can have both dynamics, right? You can have a child who was murdered last night, and you may have another child who's in prison for murder. What a dynamic. What a dynamic. And so in that space, again, and with that as the experience and understanding, listening and learning and privileging the voices of the disinherited, having a trauma-centered focus, and 3, broadening our focus to include social emotional understanding is critical. I work with Moms Demand Action. I work with a number of organizations that are engaged in really we're all soldiers in the same challenge, trying to save lives. But very often, you know, the question they say is why can't we get traction in urban centers the way we can get traction in suburban centers? And my plea and my call is just this: you have to understand these three dynamics that I share. And so in that space, I'm going to share some things. A 5-point action plan for America, okay? Informed by all that I've given. Number one, anger management and conflict resolution in every classroom 0 through 6. I think whether you're talking about a child who's been bullied in the suburbs or a child who's bullied right around the corner from here, educating young people, providing them the tools to deal with those social, emotional issues, which would probably lend to a better decision maker when one is traumatized from this trauma-centered approach. Number two, every house of worship shall, within a 3-block radius of their community, have some education with those 0 to 6 kids in anger management, conflict resolution. Reach out, put in place an anger management, conflict resolution curriculum in your congregation, or facilitate it in some way. Make space for someone to do it. Reach out, bring somebody in, and help them to establish so that you can begin to reach out to these young people who are apparently facing some challenges that they just can't settle with the tools that they have. Help them by providing them these additional tools. Number three, encourage that in every college and university, there might be, as part of the freshman curriculum, anger management, conflict resolution. Wouldn't that be powerful? If that at every college across this country, community college or other, you knew that those kids were going to get some information on conflict resolution and anger management as really a bedrock of their understanding. If we're talking about changing policy, how would we change policy if every college freshman came home with just a simple understanding of different ways to resolve conflict? I think that some of the policy pieces that I've heard that folks talk about in this space, I think it'd be an easier sell if we were all oriented from a space of understanding our inner centers in our decision making. Those are the pieces. Those are the pieces I'd share there. But anger management is center in that space, and conflict resolution is center in that space. And these are pieces that we approach here. I'll share, folks. We have a program here that we partner with a number of folks with. It's called Little Hands, Little Feet Gun Safety Program, and it's interesting because you don't hear very often discuss gun safety in the context of urban violence, or even in the context of gun violence prevention efforts. But we'd like to, in this space, and this program is designed to engage children 8 to 12. We talk about guns in the household, and we help to, and I'll read from a brochure we got here. Children will be empowered to begin the culture change and create a new beginning in their environments. Children will be taught to understand the importance of their role as citizens. We talk about that gun in the context of their role as citizens, and so that they understand, again, we center a social emotional understanding, the social context of guns in their environment and their role in transforming their environment by appropriating a different relationship between them and the handgun. This program, which we call, I affectionately call Creating Safe and Vibrant Neighborhoods Isn't Magic. We also include in this a magician. And the magician will share, he adds another dynamic to engage the young people in this space. But thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Cornelius. All right, it looks like we are moving into our question and answer session now. We already have one question. Yes, Beth asks how she can get a copy of the presentation to start working with the session at her church. I will be happy to email out a copy of the PowerPoint, and this webinar will also be uploaded to the website for Standing Our Holy Ground. So we'll be sure to get that to you there. And then let's see, someone else has asked, Roy, you showed slides of 2 things you did in 2013 in response to the Sandy Hook shooting. Do you think it has made a difference? If so, how?
Well, that's a huge question, you know, that we all ask. Do any of our efforts make a difference? So I'm a person of faith and I'm a person of hope. And I think that it probably has made a difference in how this congregation and the people that have been involved in our conversations think about gun violence. Empirically, has it changed the minds of those who are voting? I would have to say that as best I can tell, the answer is no, because we're not making headway in the way that any of us want on getting safer gun laws involved. So, you know, that's kind of a mixed answer. I think it's a good question. You know, how effective is anything that we do on something that's as, intractable as the pervasive gun violence? But we all have to do our part and then hope that the others will respond accordingly. But thanks for the question.
Thank you, Roy. While we're waiting for a few more questions to come in from our audience, I'll go ahead and ask one. So each of you has described a different way that a congregation can begin to address gun violence in their community, whether it be from starting from within the congregation to partnering with external organizations. One question that I think comes to mind is, what's the best way to go about identifying either and reaching out to partners and identify who's already engaged in the work? And then also, how does a congregation identify sort of the gifts within and amongst its members to best be able to raise its voice amidst the larger gun violence prevention picture? That's open to anyone.
I'll take a shot at it. No, I'll talk about the way we do it because that's what we know. We actually don't necessarily look for places that are already part of the movement, if you will. Networking is there's no secret to networking. Everybody knows what it is, and that's basically how we do it, is to reach out for a clergy person. They typically kick it down to a committee, which makes sense because they're too busy, and then people know people, and that's why being locally based is really important, because people know their neighbors and they know people at their schools, kids' schools, and so on, and so that it begins to expand. And many places have ministeriums, which are also key to getting the news out. We also don't expect people within a congregation to take particular roles until after we do the memorial to the lost in particular, because we believe and have learned that there are people in these faith communities, in these houses of worship, that feel like we do perhaps around gun violence prevention, but somebody doesn't know that somebody down the pew from them feels the way that they do. And the memorial to the lost, one of the beauties of it is it opens space in faith communities to talk about the issue, which is ideal, because once they start talking about it, then people find out that there are other people there that feel the way they do. And now the discussion becomes much more open, and real deep issues can be dealt with in that regard. And then these are the people that we sign up to be part of our gun violence awareness days and so on and so forth. We put them to work, if you will.
Thank you, Brian. Cornelius.
Yes. So I'll share what the First and Franklin Presbyterian Church of Baltimore did. Pastor Hawk there, who and the First Presbyterian, First and Franklin Presbyterian Church, who are partners with us. They saw a article on one of the families that we have provided support to in the newspaper, and I got a phone call. Pastor Hawk, he called me up. He said, "Look, I read this article about you working with this family." He says, "We've got a purple ribbon campaign we've done for a number of years." He says, "But he said, I feel inspired and really directed to go closer, walk closer to what's going on. These ribbons are not connecting to this community, to the community that is being so greatly impacted." He said, and in my congregation, we read the stories, we see the articles, and we've done the ribbons, and we still feel helpless. What can we do? And so with that phone call, it sparked additional engagement. We brought a program to the First and Franklin Presbyterian congregation that we call Voices, where we have 3 survivors respond to 5 prompts that to engage audiences more closely with their experience and their reality. The first one of those prompts is they speak in first person terms, in active terms, active tense of their loved one. You know, my son John has a beautiful smile, and they share those. And then the second prompt is the moment I found out. The third prompt is what I miss most. The fourth prompt is the big lie, which really is really heart-wrenching very often, because they share all of those things, those pains that society leaves just for those family members who are left behind. You know, all those unanswered questions, all of those, were you a good parent? All those questions that someone is left with. And the fifth is my life now. That's what. So
Simon, I'm sorry, Cornelius.
That's fine. Go. You got it, Brian.
Simon, can I go back to the question that Roy was asked about effectiveness?
Absolutely.
Because I got asked this. I was with the Pennsylvania Council of Churches this morning, and I got the same question. And I actually do believe that this work that we're doing, all of us, is very effective. And I have a couple of reasons to believe that, other than my faith. And one of them is we work to teach people about how guns reach the street. I mentioned that before. When we started 9 or 10 years ago, no one in the United States, much less Philadelphia, where we are, had any idea of what gun trafficking or straw buying or that whole illegal market was about. We worked through getting attention to our stuff to teach people about it. And now everybody in Philadelphia knows what straw buying is and what about the illegal gun market and so on. And it's spreading beyond Philadelphia, where we're in the suburbs, where we also do a lot of work. And another example is 10 years ago, when we started, in the 5 counties in southeastern Pennsylvania, representatives in the Harrisburg in the legislature, but all Republicans in the legislature in those 5 counties were what we'll call pro-NRA, for lack of a better term. And half of the Democrats were. After 10 years of working on this, and not just Heeding God's Call, but other organizations working with us, all of the Democrats are now vote for gun violence prevention, and most of the Republicans do as well. That's a remarkable change, and it didn't just happen. It happened because of advocacy, and we're happy to be a really big part of that. So yeah, I definitely think it's effective.
Simon, just one comment about that other question. Thank you, Brian, by the way. But the other question about networking, I think that you have to just call people, like, for instance, in doing the things that we've been doing, we have members in our, they associate with people at work, they associate with people in their neighborhood, they go to other churches or spiritual faith communities, and you can talk with people there. And I've reached out to rabbis, people in the Muslim community, as well as other pastor colleagues around this. And several of the things that we've done together have been ecumenical in spirit, as well as participation in every way. So as Brian said, it really is about picking up the phone, sharing with others. And then I guess secondly, to the questioner, is we're frequently inviting people within our congregation to offer up whatever gifts they have in this. And the invite goes out repeatedly, because you never know when somebody's going to say, I'm now called to this work.
Thank you, Roy. Marjorie, do you have something you'd like to add?
I do. We work with congregations, we being the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship, we work with congregations all over the country. So first of all, anyone who is a Presbyterian is not doing this work by themselves. There's a network of people who we can connect people to, both locally within, tell us what your zip code is, we can help you find people in your location that would be supportive. The other thing I want to point out is that this is not something that you need to be an expert about. If you have a compassionate heart, if you have a feeling that there is something wrong with having 40,000 people a year die by guns, that is enough to give you a platform to do something about it. The Presbyterian Peace Fellowship has a ton of resources on our website. The major one is called our Congregational Toolkit, which Simon will give you a link for in a little bit. But I want to just point out at the end of the toolkit, there's an entire section where every single state in the union, there's a list of local organizations. So you might need to begin by looking beyond the faith community to find partners who you can connect with locally. Because sadly, the faith community at this point is kind of behind groups like Moms Demand Action, Every Town for Gun Sense in America. So we might need to look beyond the church to begin that work. But that doesn't mean it has to only stay out there. We want people within the faith community, as Brian pointed out, to claim this, to say we are doing this because of who we are as people of faith and what we believe. We feel called and compelled to do this work. The other thing I wanted to say about finding gifts within a congregation to take on this work, it's probably helpful to first think about what kind of work you want to do before you start casting out about for asking folks to join with you. So if you are inclined to the kind of work that Cornelius is doing, that's going to call for a very different skill set of people than the kind of work that Brian is doing, with more activist work. So really identifying, spending some time discerning what it is that your congregation feels called to is a really important and critical step in this process, even though it feels like there is desperate urgency and some people just want to do something now. And while I can appreciate the urgency, it's often helpful to stop, take a breath, and do some discernment before jumping in. If you have people who have already stated what their passion is and what their willingness is in a particular area, go with that. And then maybe grow from there with bringing other people in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marjorie. And Marjorie, while we have you, would you like to go ahead and give an overview of another opportunity that congregations can take part of within the PCUSA with regards to the next General Assembly?
Certainly. We are currently working with the Chicago Presbytery on bringing forth an overture to the General Assembly. The overture has several parts. The first part, the first recommendation, is about commending all of the folks that are connected within the PCUSA that we're aware of who are currently doing this work, because we think that it's really important to raise up and name outright, name and thank the people who are doing this really important and difficult work. And then the second recommendation is a call, a renewed call to, hey, there's lots of room for lots of people to join us. Come on in and join us in whatever way you can. And then the third part is probably the most critical. What we're asking for is an update to a policy document. In 2010, the PCUSA published a document called Gun Violence and Gospel Values, Mobilizing in Response to God's Call. Since 2010, there has been a lot of activity in the realm of gun violence prevention, and a lot of the statistics, a lot of the resources that are listed in that document have now become out of date, and we'd like to see a more updated policy document. And we'd like it to address some of the concerns that we have really been addressing, particularly within the Presbyterian Peace Fellowship and within the PCUSA as a church, with the Matthew 25 efforts and addressing, looking to become a more open and open church, and addressing issues of racism and white supremacy and how that impacts on everything that we do. So we were looking particularly to see if an updated document could include some outright sections on this historical and sinful intersection between guns and racism, and also the impact of gun violence specifically on women and children, including domestic violence, including the trauma inflicted on children with all of the school lockdowns and some of the real extreme ways that schools go about preparing children for an active shooter situation. And so how do we need to be thinking about those things as a church? So if you would like to participate in bringing this overture to General Assembly, we'd be delighted to have your presbytery concur with the Chicago Presbytery. So please contact me and let me know, and we'd be happy to pass this along to you.
And for clarification, Marjorie, Jennifer asks if the Presbytery of Chicago has already approved this overture.
No, they have not, in fact.
Okay.
There are two congregations within the Chicago Presbytery who have already brought this to their session, and Chicago Presbytery will consider this at their next meeting.
Okay. And then how would someone get a copy of this overture to take it to their presbytery to concur?
They could ask me for one.
All right. Well, we'll be happy to send that information out. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your question. We are going to move now to our closing segment. Thank you so much, everyone, for asking your great questions. Before we close, we would like to remind our audience about our ongoing webinar series. We continue this Friday, November 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be revisiting our discussion on the role of mental health in gun violence with Dr. Beth McGinty, professor at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health. To register for our upcoming webinars, please visit the Presbyterian Peacemaking Program's website for the series, presbyterianmission.org/standing our holy ground. This webinar will be available, the recording will be available on this website as well. All right. Well, we would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing their amazing insights as well as their experiences. We would also like to thank our audience for joining our discussion, and we hope that everyone will join us on Friday for our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.